The following Truth Barista podcast is a High Beam Ministry production.
Is there an advantage to being a firstborn? You bet there is. There's a big advantage to being a firstborn. You know, President of the United States in our last election, 8 of the 11 who were in the running for the presidency were firstborn children. The astronauts in outer space are the first 21 firstborn children. The other 2, only children. Firstborns are reliable people. They're conscientious people. They're the movers and shakers of the world. They're the ones that do things right. In fact, their mantra is, if I want things done right, I'll do it myself. Thank you.
Welcome to the Erzatz Coffee Shop. This is Jay, your Truth Barista, and I'm serving up a steamy cup of God's truth for the average Joe. You can catch me and this podcast on my websites, truthbarista.com, all one word, truthbarista.com, and highbeamministry.com. That's HIGHBEAM ministry.com, as in car high beam. We're shining the light of God's truth on the road ahead.
Truth Barista, it's still pretty lonely around here. I mean, I sure hope we get back to normal someday.
Well, I'm pretty sure that we will. I see the coffee flying out the door, but it does give me a lot of time to kind of sit and study. And, you know, I've got a really fascinating thing if you're interested for today's Bible study.
Well, it depends on the topic, if I'm interested or not.
Okay, the topic is this. How often have you read in the scriptures, as you've gone through it, using the phrase or the word firstborn?
Well, quite a few. Now, is that kind of the topic you're going with?
That's what I want to go to, because I love the cultural context. Because when you understand the culture of ancient Israel relative to, say, something like a firstborn, and you really dig into it, suddenly you go, oh, then all these other times they mention firstborn in the Bible, it really means something more than what I think it means from a 20th century, 21st century perspective. See, I was a whole century off there.
Boy, I guess.
So tell me, firstborns in your family.
Yeah, who are they?
Tell me about your firstborns.
Well, my firstborns, they're all over the map.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I have one firstborn. Mm-hmm. He's the oldest, and he's definitely a firstborn.
Okay, and now how would you describe a firstborn?
Well, I would describe a firstborn as very privileged.
Okay.
And oftentimes it takes advantage of the other siblings.
Okay.
Usually is the bully.
Okay.
And is the controller.
Are you saying he's kind of like the rooster that rules the roost?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much. And all the focus is on him because obviously the first child goes through everything first. And so it's the first time he's in sports. He's the first time he's in everything. So he gets a lot of attention.
Yes, he does. Okay. When your firstborn was born, a son.
Yes.
Okay. How did you feel about your firstborn son?
Well, when he was born, his nose was over to the left. And it really bothered me.
He had his father's looks, huh?
Yeah. Funny. I just was really concerned about it because I thought, my goodness, his nose is smushed against his other.
Okay. Personal looks aside.
Let
me ask you hopes and dreams. I mean, what were you thinking looking at this blank slate of a firstborn son?
Well, I had great aspirations, of course, because he was my son.
Okay. Did you expect him to follow in father's footsteps, or how did you treat that?
You know, I didn't. I didn't expect him. I've never been one to think that somebody should do exactly like me. However, I knew that he was going to be an athlete in that sense, because when I was younger, I was an athlete, and it did hold true. He was quite an athlete.
You say athlete like it has like 3 syllables. That's amazing.
That's, I know, an athlete. You know, it is funny how we use words. Anyway,
so he was going to be an athlete.
Athlete, yes, athlete.
I'm never going to let you forget that. Okay, I have a firstborn, but it's a firstborn daughter. Okay, and I grew up in a family of 3 kids, and I'm the middle child. And when you talk birth orders, it's really fascinating. In fact, there's a book out there called the Birth Order Book.
Yes.
I don't remember who the author is, but it's fascinating because firstborns are usually the pioneers of the family. They feel they need to walk in their father's footsteps. They need to take responsibility for the family, which is really fascinating because this is an idea that really goes back back to very ancient times. And it's usually the second-born who's a little bit more freewheeling, a little bit more experimental, often bucks the firstborn, which was very much the case in my family with myself and my older brother, and we still laugh about things like that today. But he was amazed because as he was going through college, he went through things like he was in biology, and microbiology was kind of the core focus. And when he got done with that, he couldn't get a job necessarily, so he went back for computer science and did extremely well. Me, I got about a year and a half into my college curriculum, and I was going science pre-med. Why? My dad was a pharmacist. So it's kind of like all three of us kids went down the science route. Well, I get about a year and a half into that degree and was absolutely tanking. Calculus killed me. And I said, forget this. I just chucked it all and said, I'm doing what I want to do. Theater. So I got a degree in theater with a minor in speech communications, and that served me well. My brother came back later and he said, I really admire you for recognizing that this wasn't going well for you and you just chucked it. He says, I was getting that feeling, but I kept going because I felt I was responsible to do that. That's very much a firstborn attitude. So really studying birth orders, especially in the Bible, is really important. This was a foundational cultural understanding and way of doing things in the Bible, and yet even though there was such a bedrock firstborn status, it's fascinating how oftentimes God replaced the firstborn with a secondborn or even somebody else and shifted things around according to his choice. That's what I want to talk about.
Oh, I think that's fascinating. I'm curious today, I know you're going to get into all of this, but do they, in the Middle East today, in Israel, do they still adhere to the firstborn kind of principle?
To a degree. I think it's with modern society, and I'm making air quotes there, things have changed, but even as I've been talking to you right now, we still have that activation of the firstborn. I mean, the father's strength is demonstrated in his firstborn son. I mean, that's my boy, kind of an attitude. Let me explain it a little bit more. Let's walk through it, and we'll talk about elements. And if we have to take a couple of Bible studies to do it, we'll do it, because this is such a crucial understanding. Shall we?
We shall.
Okay, so here we go. You're right. The firstborn is a very privileged position. And I love what Sandra Richter says in her book, The Epic of Eden, which, by the way, I think you should read and any Christian should read. It's really foundational book. I love it. Israel is not the way it was today. When we say that Israel is ancient, Israel is not as Israel is today or the nations are today. Israel is very tribal back in ancient times. All the legal and all of the economy of basically the economic structure rotated around the family. And since it was patriarchal, guess who was at the very center of this whole legal economic structure? The family? It would be
Mom.
Now I know you're just yanking my leg. Okay, give me the answer.
Well, who would be the center of the home?
Who would be the center of the home?
Well, the center of the home was father.
Exactly. It's a patriarchal family.
Right.
And I like what she also says in the book. It was patriarchal, meaning he was the center. It was patrilineal, which means everything is determined whose son of whose father you were. Mm-hmm. So all the lines came down through the father. And it was also patrilocal. Isn't that fascinating?
Well, you've got so many words. I mean, my goodness.
I know. Patrilocal, it simply means the father is the benchmark of the family, and that was the family home. And as the family grew, you built onto the father's house until it got too big to handle, and then you could calve off, so to speak, part of the family, and that son would become the center of a new patrilocal family. So now when Jesus says, I'm going away, in my father's house are many
mansions.
It's not mansions, it's rooms.
Rooms, okay.
Jesus is using that same Israel idea of, I'm just building my family and I'm attaching rooms so we can all be together.
Right.
We are all going to just center around my father. And guess what? Jesus is the father's firstborn son. So now you can begin to see how this is starting to relate together. Keep going.
I just want to go back to my comment about mom being the center, because today that's how it is. Because mom really is, as they say on a basketball team, there's a playmaker, right? All the plays emanate from one player. She is the playmaker in today's family.
Very often, the father is often looked upon as the let's say back in the 50s, the breadwinner, and mom kind of took care of the house. And they did it as a team. Part of the whole feminist movement really pulled the husband out of, or the man out of the primacy of that relationship, raised up the money. In fact, pushed and guilted the mother up and put her in the place of the breadwinner, really tried to thrust women out into the marketplace. And people made it that it was a very unnecessary sort of thing because of economics. I mean, originally, we're supposed to be working in tandem.
Correct.
We've talked about that before, but after the fall, it says the man will then take the lead in the relationship, etc. So it's actually the man as the head of the family is a post-fall thing. But that doesn't mean God can't use it. And in this case, in ancient Israel, this is just the way it was. So everything centered around the father. Well, we all know that we're going to get old and all of us fathers are going to die, right? Well, who's going to follow in our footsteps? Who's going to take care of the family left behind?
Well, that firstborn that's a bully and is arrogant and has been spoiled.
Well, that's what you think. And that is certainly the case. I mean, you read through the Bible and some of the firstborns in Israel, man, they were just real jerks, okay? And we'll talk about that too. But it's true. When the father dies, it would all fall to the shoulders of the firstborn son. This is why having a son as quickly as possible was so crucial, because the son had very important duties at the time and duties in the future. So let me set this up to you. I'm going to go back to Richter a little bit here. The father really kind of served two purposes in the family in those days. And I want to put it in these terms. He was the king, in air quotes, and he was the priest of the family. So as to the king, Richter writes, and I've got this right here in a note I wanted to share with you, he was responsible for the economic well-being of the family. He enforced law, and he had responsibility to care for his own who became marginalized through poverty, death, or war. In other words, if somebody in the family fell on hard economic times, was captured in battle, or for some reason death happened in the family, like the husband died and the wife is marginalized, let's say it's the daughter-in-law, it was the father's duty to take care of the vulnerable and the weak in the family. That was his job as the ruler. Let me get your reaction on this one. In our culture, people look to the state to be the father. So if there's an economic problem, where do people run for income? The state.
Well, yeah, it's been the philosophy of socialism for a long time, and that's what it is. The state is the papa.
And the goal of socialism is to make the state the father, God, so that people will be serving the state rather than serving themselves cooperatively. I always find that interesting when we're talking about socialism and these types of governmental structures. Well, we can't have capitalism or some of these other things because there's always those few at the top that always get the money and they serve as, despots and tyrants over everybody else in capitalism. Well, yeah, that's kind of what happens in socialism and communism too. This isn't that type of rise to the top to be the ruler over everyone. That's endemic in everything.
Well, I'm always amazed, because you brought up the political, is that Putin is a $40 billion man. How do you get to have $40 billion in a communist country?
It's very easy to do. You just have to rename the treasury your wallet. That's how you do it. Okay, so back to our study. In Israelite tribal society, the head of the family has a responsibility to take care of those who are on the fringe, the weak, the vulnerable, the disadvantaged. In other words, and let me know if this says anything to you, the father or the leader of the family was responsible to take care of the least of these. Does that sound familiar?
Well, it sounds just like Matthew 25.
Exactly. Jesus is using patriarch talk. He's using elder brother idioms when he says, the least of these, my brethren. He doesn't even have to be called the firstborn of the father. He just used the words indicating that he takes that responsibility on his shoulders already, because his job as and I'm using air quotes again, a patriarch in training, so to speak, is to take care of his siblings. Okay? that Moses says of God, he executes justice for the widow and orphan of Israel and shows his love for the foreigner, the people not a part of Israel, by giving him food and clothing, shows that Moses regards the Heavenly Father, well, it shows that God is the Father of both Israel and all the nations. In other words, God is the patriarch of humanity. All of humanity revolves around him. All humanity belongs in his house and actually started in his home in Eden before they got rebellious and got kicked out. And all of us determine our lineage ultimately back to our Creator, our Heavenly Father. Do you see how awesome this picture is? Now, I'll tell you what's also awesome. The fact that I know you're, out of your gracious nature, are going to pick up my coffee cup and refill it because I'm really thirsty after this.
Yes, and I can imagine. I know you said you weren't the firstborn, but you sure act like it.
Yeah, so go get the cup of coffee.
Firstborn kids have some big advantages. As parents photograph them and endlessly ooh and ah over their every move, they grow up feeling secure and good about themselves. In addition to that special nurturing, firstborns often take charge of younger siblings. That can make them natural leaders. Many of our presidents have been firstborns, including George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Bill Clinton.
Truth Barista, we're living in such turbulent times with this coronavirus. What advice would you have for our audience?
Well, the first thing, you have to not give into fear, right? I mean, you listened to a recent Dennis Prager.
Yes, and he was saying some wonderful things. Don't waste this time, but contact your friends by phone or by Skype and talk to them and your family. Do things that you haven't done for years. Do things together as a family in your own home, but do something productive and don't sit and mope and get depressed by what you hear on the news.
So on the negative side, don't give into fear, right? That means we have to limit our consumption of the news, consumption of social media. Now, we don't want to be uninformed. We want to be informed. But man, talk about Debbie Downers, and stay away from the people who are being uber sensational about this and just stoking the fires. We don't need this. It is what it is, okay? It's like a pandemic, like a flu-type pandemic, although it has different characteristics. But, and this is the point I'd like to make too, is admittedly and apparently this has a high infection rate. So if we lower the possibility of infection, we'll have a lower potential for spread, and that will lower the severe number of cases and even deaths, and lower the strain on the hospitals so that they can keep pace and give proper care for those who need it. So really the positive thing is this is a great opportunity, like you said, to stay at home, stay in the neighborhood. I've seen a lot of people walking their dogs, hanging out with their kids, gardening already, doing some fantastic things. And you know what's the most important thing for us? You gotta stay in the coffee and you gotta stay in the Word.
What a great combination. Thanks for that encouragement, Truth Barista.
And don't forget to listen to the past episodes of the Truth Barista.
Great thought.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so let's go on with this. So we talked about the father. The father is responsible for the family. He's supposed to take care of the weaker members, and he leads the family. He is also in charge of redemption. Some of these vulnerable family members, through poverty or something, could sell themselves off, so to speak, as an indentured servant or a slave because they needed to stay alive. So they traded their work and their effort for support from a neighbor, let's say, or somebody from another. It would be better if you did it with a neighbor in Israel than sell yourself to one of the nations. That's where you were treated as a slave. If that happened, the father's primary duty was to do everything he could to pay off that kid's or that vulnerable person's debt so they could be restored to his family and come home and live in the homestead. That is called redemption. The biblical meaning of redemption. It's the father's responsibility to take care of a debt so that that child of his can come home and live with him because he loves him and it's his duty to care for his family.
So can I ask a question here? This is kind of a rabbit trail, but I think it's important. The prodigal son was given an inheritance prior to the death of the father. Why was that allowed?
It was allowed when the father got older, and it helped to prepare the transition from father to firstborn son. Now remember, in that parable, you have a father, you have an elder brother, and then you have the prodigal. That's basically the three characters. So the father is in charge of the estate, and when he died, 2/3 of the estate would go to the firstborn, 1/3 would go to the other kid, the secondborn. And I'll explain why it's a double versus a single. Well, you could actually in those days pre-claim your estate before the father died. Now, there are a variety of different ways of doing this, but in this particular parable, the secondborn son sold off his part of estate and just blew it on wine, women, and song. And he comes back, and the only part of the estate that's left is the 2 portions belonging to the elder son, the firstborn son. And now what does the elder firstborn son look at the secondborn going, why are you coming back here? I'm not giving you anything. I need this money. And we'll explain why. But I need this money. You're infringing on what belongs to me. And he goes to dad and says, why are you doing this for this kid? He spent everything. He basically looked at you and regarded you as if you were dead. The point of the parable is not inheritance and firstborn, it's the father's love, and both of the sons did not understand their father's love.
Right.
Okay, but embedded within that parable is very much the principle of patriarchs and firstborn sons. I'm glad you brought that up because that's a wonderful illustration why, if you understand patriarchs, if you understand firstborn sons, that parable absolutely blows open with meaning. So let's keep going, shall we? So we talked about redemption. Redemption is more about restoring somebody to the family than just debt payment. Debt payment is a vehicle. It's the father's love and care for the vulnerable to restore them. And here's the other thing. If you have a firstborn son, that is the oldest living male member of the family, and that kid, besides the father, is the central hub of the family. He's kind of like the next rung out, so to speak, the next circle out. When the father dies, the oldest son becomes the leader of the family. He moves from patriarch in training to patriarch in dad's place. While he was under the father, he was mentored and apprenticed on a family business. Could have been a herdsman, could have been a builder, so to speak. Joseph and Jesus could have been a builder. That was very much the culture of that time. It was never to be a position to achieve. You couldn't achieve it. You really could. You had to be born into it primarily. And you weren't supposed to exploit it. Let's put it that way.
But you could sell it.
You could sell it. Now, you get it by birthright and you get it by other means as well. But primary is it was just something you were born into. Most important in this, it was a function to help the family flourish. The firstborn son is not there for his own benefit, and everybody doesn't come crawling to him to serve him. His job was to serve the family. It's their interests that take the primary role, not his.
Well, I remember when Jesus was on the cross and he actually asked John, his disciple, to take care of his mother. So in some ways, when the father, the patriarch, dies and there's a mother, a wife that survives him, then the firstborn has to take care of her too.
Right. And what Jesus did was transfer that responsibility to somebody, John, who would take on the role in place of Jesus. Very good. Okay, you're starting to make the connections here. Okay, so this was not a position to achieve or to exploit, but it was a function in the family. As a result, and this is what blows people's minds. By the way, let me back up for just a second. Remember I said it was something the family's interests come first and not the person? Since Jesus is called the firstborn, it makes sense why he said, I did not come to be served, but to serve and provide my life as a ransom, there's the redemption, for many. in that passage, Jesus is citing patriarch, firstborn son language.
Boy, is that good.
I know, isn't that cool?
I would never have imagined that because we don't have the patriarch. It's the same thing as we don't have a monarchy here. So I never understood the whole thing in England, right?
Exactly.
It just doesn't make sense to me. So this is very good. It's kind of helping us.
You know, and let me tag on that one too. It's really fascinating being in the United States. It's a democracy. We're a representative republic. Yes, I get that. But you know, I'm important, I'm protected, I have my rights and my responsibilities and all that. Nobody's going to tell me what to do because I have rugged individualism and hi-ho and off to the west we go kind of a thing, right? We totally miss what it means to live under a monarchy. And God's kingdom is not a democracy, and it's not a representative republic. It is a benevolent dictatorship, if you want to put it that way.
I love that. It's true.
And I'm kind of, being a little flip with that, but really, being under a monarch like our king, our father, our king, Alvino Malkeno in Hebrew, to be in that position is wonderful because now you have a king who's not only somebody who can be trusted, but somebody who will provide and help and support, and he lovingly asks for our willing service to him. It's the best of all worlds, physical and spiritual. I mean, really, it is. But we miss that whole thing if we look at the democracy aspect of it. Okay, now, as a result, because the father is the hub of all of the family, and the firstborn is the patriarch in training, the father serves as the ruler of the family. He's the king. Therefore, the firstborn is, in a sense, the king in training or the king in waiting. And in addition to the leading the family, the father also served as a priest. So you have a father who's a king, and the father serves as a priest. Now, what does a priest do? A priest mediates between God and another party or another person. So basically, the father represents the family to God, and the father represents God to the family. So with that in your head, it should start exploding all sorts of these things about Jesus being a priest. For he represents humanity before his father. He represents his father before humanity, and he mediates between the two parties.
Well, I would think that would be very understandable to the first century because they're still living under that patriarchal system.
Yeah.
But they didn't get it. And today we don't get it so often because we're not under that system.
They didn't get it because by the time you get to Jesus' day, this idea of the patriarch serving as both king and priest had been divided. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next one. It might not be next Friday, maybe the Friday after that. But that's what we're going to talk about. How did this get divided? How is it coming back together? So let me explain this.
Okay.
When you go back to Genesis and to the ancient Israel times, you see the head of the family serving as a ruler. You also see the head of the family serving as a priest. For example, Noah. Was Noah the patriarch of the family?
Sure.
Yeah, he's the oldest guy on earth after the flood, so he is actually the patriarch of all humanity. He's the head of the human race, and at that time, 8 people in all. And what did he do? He gets off the ark. First thing, Genesis 8, he builds an altar. That's a priestly function. Melchizedek, the king of Salem, he was a priest also. So he's a king priest. He is, in a sense, the patriarch over Jerusalem at that time, and he blessed Abraham. You find that in Genesis 14. When Abraham was called, notice God kind of carved him off from his family. He says, leave your family behind. I want to do something special with you. Okay, so Abraham now becomes the head of a family. Well, not much of one because it's just him and Sarah and the servants and the workers around him. Okay, but that still makes him the head of that family. Well, he built altars in Genesis 12:7, 8, 13:18, and 22:9. So he's serving as both the ruler and the priest of the family. His son, Isaac, when he became a patriarch, he built an altar in Genesis 25:26, and his son, Jacob, soon to be called Israel, builds an altar to God in Genesis 33:20 and 35:7. So up to a certain point, the patriarch functioned as a king priest within his family, and his job was to protect the family and to provide for the family and to redeem those who were separated separated from the family and to bring them back home. That is the core of this ancient idea of a patriarch and a firstborn.
Wow. I mean, it's so interesting, and it all fits, right?
That's what I love about it. It fits together.
So where are we going next week?
Okay, I want to talk about more on the firstborn, because the firstborn was given two things that were very important. He was given a birthright and he was given a blessing. And those two things have to go together for the firstborn to do his job. So I want to talk about those particular aspects. I want to talk about famous firstborns. I want to talk about how you replace firstborns. And then I want to take this idea of a firstborn and say, if Jesus is a firstborn, what does that mean? If a nation is a firstborn nation, where did they come from and what does that mean? And you're going to be blown away.
I can't wait.
This is Jay, your Truth Barista. Thanks for listening to the Truth Barista podcast.